Hello, and welcome to our second class on the Book of Revelation. Let's start with a quick review. The Book of Revelation isn't a code to crack to learn about the second coming of Jesus or a book to be avoided, but it is ultimately a call to Christians to remain faithful to God and fearless in living out their faith. Revelation draws back the veil that separates heaven and earth to give us a glimpse of what God is doing behind the scenes. Revelation begins with 7 letters to 7 churches who are dealing with the real-life issues of persecution, assimilation, or complacency. After the 7 letters, the tone of Revelation shifts, and the story really takes off. The visions in chapters 4 and 5 are the heart of the book, centering on God and Christ in the heavenly throne room. As the visions unfold, we will find ourselves return to the heavenly throne room multiple times to be reminded of who is in ultimate control, regardless of the evil that appears to flourish. This PowerPoint is taken from the Crossways course by Harry Wendt and illustrates how Revelation is structured in a spiral of threatening visions followed by visions of the heavenly throne room. Just as it seems evil is unstoppable, John's vision returns the reader to the throne room of God to remember who is in control of creation. Revelation is structured in cycles of 7 letters, seals, trumpets, signs, bowls, and sights. The cycles are usually marked off by the vision of the heavenly throne room, so today we will look at the cycle found in chapters 4 to 7. One side note about how numbers are used in biblical literature. For the Jews, numbers often signified much more than a certain quantity of an object. For instance, the number 7 signified perfection, while the number 6 signified imperfection. It's 1 less than 7. The numbers 3, 4, and 7 also suggest completeness, and 4 could also point to the created world. The number 12 stands for the 12 tribes of Israel, or the 12 disciples of Jesus. 1,000 indicates a large number. It's a lot. And 144,000 indicates immensity, a whole lot. So as we encounter numbers in the text, we'll look at what they convey beyond quantity. As we turn to Revelation 4, we encounter an open door in verse 1. Remember, the last few verses of chapter 3, the door is closed. John wants us to understand we are invited to peek in and learn more about God and his plan for his world. As we do, we are given a vision of God's heavenly throne room. The first vision is of worship, not disaster. In verse 2, we read that God is central. His presence is radiant, and we can't ignore him. John is at a loss for words to describe the vision, and so he uses the phrase, looks like, because an exact description defies human language. The word picture of the throne room preserves the mystery and transcendence of God. God is God, and we are not. John then describes the entire created order, arranged in rings of praise, in the proper order of things. All creation is oriented toward God, and humans are not the center of the universe. John first sees 24 elders, who as God's heavenly council sit on thrones like kings. They represent the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles, the leaders of the people of God in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. If we remember back to the promises given the churches in the 7 letters, we see the outcome of being faithful. The elders have a place on thrones as promised to the church at Laodicea. They wear white robes as promised to the church at Sardis, and crowns as promised to the church at Smyrna. The robes symbolize purity and victory, while the crowns indicate the royal priesthood. John hears great thunder and sees lightning, and we realize God is both powerful and unapproachable. It's not quiet and serene when God's plans are revealed. We need to buckle up because there is turbulence ahead. Also around the throne are 4 living creatures. They evoke the scene of the 4 creatures in the vision given to Ezekiel. The lion, the king of the wild animals, the ox, the leader of the domesticated animals, the eagle, the greatest of all the birds, and humans. All of animal creation is represented in these 4 creatures. Each of these creatures are full of eyes to keep track of creation, always at the ready to do God's bidding. Taken together, all creation is called to worship God, the Creator. John wants his readers to look at the world from the vantage point of the heavenly throne room, not from the perspective of human centers of power. John's first readers would have easily compared this heavenly court to that of the Roman emperors who also sat on thrones. The emperors were greeted by delegations dressed in white who presented the emperors with golden crowns, which was a recognition of Roman sovereignty. By getting a glimpse of real power, John wanted the churches to see how worldly power is a poor imitation of the power the true ruler wields. What John sees in the heavenly throne room is what we should see on earth, power centered on God, not on human leaders. How will the churches respond to this vision? Those who are persecuted are reassured because God reigns despite hostility from humans. Those who are tempted to compromise their faith become uneasy. If God reigns, they shouldn't compromise their convictions. Finally, those who are becoming complacent realize that pride in their own wealth and prestige absolutely pales when compared to God's splendor. John's attention now turns to a scroll that God holds. There are 7 seals on the scroll, which means it is impossible for an unauthorized person to open it. We will soon discover it's God's plan for the world. But no one can open it. God's initial plan for creation was to work through obedient humans, to care for and manage his good world. We failed miserably. But Jesus is the perfect obedient human, and one of the elders reassures John that Jesus was about to appear. Watch for the contrast between what John sees and what he hears. In verse 5, John hears the elder speak of the Lion of Judah. We are expecting to see a powerful creature who inflicts death. But John sees a lamb, a weak creature who is slaughtered, but is standing. A weak creature conquers death by dying? It doesn't make sense. Then add the 7 horns and 7 eyes, and we know we can't take this literature literally. Psalm 132 gives us the clue for the horns. They represent royal power, and when there are 7, we are looking at universal power. The eyes represent the Spirit. Isaiah prophesied the Spirit of the Lord will rest on the Messiah with wisdom, understanding, counsel, might, and knowledge. 7 eyes mean universal knowledge, wisdom, and might. The Lamb takes the scroll, and the 4 creatures and the 24 elders bow before the Lamb, who is Jesus. It is Jesus who fulfills God's plans and who is worthy to open the scroll. The golden bowls of incense held by the elders are prayers, the link between heaven and earth. The harps may symbolize our imperfect worship on earth that becomes the beautiful music of a new song. Now, why didn't John just say that? Well, John is using symbols to evoke multiple memories. The lamb that was sacrificed recalls the Passover lamb. Isaiah promised the Messiah would be like a lamb led to slaughter. When you fuse a lion who embodies ultimate power and supreme royalty with a lamb who embodies gentle vulnerability and the weakness of death, you recognize the victory of the lion was won through the sacrifice of the lamb. The lamb brings us into a new relationship with God by defeating death. In contrast, the world uses death to shatter relationships, which is what the beast will do in the coming chapters. This has significant implications for Christians today. If you think you will change the world through the brute force of the lion, you must look at the victory won by the sacrifice of a lamb. And if you think the only reason for Jesus to die was for you to go to heaven, you must look at the victory won by the lion's power to change the present world. This vision invites Christians to join in and sing. The first song praises the Lamb for what he's achieved. He rescued God's people. The Lamb turned us from useless rebels to priests in the kingdom. The countless angels join in the second song, praising the Lamb because he frankly deserves honor and glory. All the strength and wealth of nations, all that enriches human life, all that allows us to appreciate God's good world is to be laid at his feet as we bow in adoration. Now, the world says something quite different. You can have your Jesus thing, but we'll keep all the power and riches and glory for ourselves. They don't want to hear this song of praise. This third song expands to include not just the heavenly creatures, but all of heaven and earth to praise both Jesus and our Creator. Things turn bleak quickly as we turn the page to chapter 6. As we move into some of the wild visions, remember, Revelation is designed to make you think and pray, not to answer all your questions. God remains a deep mystery, even though he chooses to reveal himself to us. Opening the seals in Revelation 6 releases threatening visions that erode our sense of security as we are confronted by all the worst things humans can do. The first 4 seals release the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The white horseman represents warfare and conquest. The red horseman represents violence and death in battle. The second horseman takes away even the illusion of peace. The black horseman signifies economic hardship and famine. 2 pounds of wheat for a day's pay is 15 times higher than the normal price. The pale green horseman symbolizes death and disease. There is a very famous woodcut by Albrecht Dürer that depicts the 4 horsemen. Dürer arranged the horsemen with the farthest back in the scene, with each subsequent horseman placed more forward in the scene. The first horseman symbolizes conquest, which is often the furthest problem from people's minds. Even the mighty Roman army, the greatest military of their day, was defeated by the Parthians. In our own time, I believe Americans' understanding of our vulnerability to conquest from outside our borders shifted after 9/11. The second horseman highlights the problems with the Pax Romana. The peace the Roman Empire brought to the people was actually a peace at the cost of oppressive measures and needed to gain and then maintain that peace. The comfortable conditions that pass for peace can easily be stripped away. The third horseman represents economic insecurity. Economic insecurity often lies at the root of violence inside and outside nations, because any economic system is limited in its ability to guarantee prosperity for everyone. Too often, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Now, is anyone worried about the economy today or about your own financial health? How about our children's future? The third horseman continues to ride today, doesn't it? The fourth horseman is one nobody will escape, for it represents death. Death's tools are often violence, famine, or disease. These are all forces beyond human control. Now we can understand why attempts to predict the end times always fail. Besides the fact Jesus told us not to try, these problems are true in all ages. War and unrest and famine and disease recur in patterns every day. Examples are crazy easy to come by. The war in Ukraine has worsened the famine in Africa. The COVID pandemic uncovered injustices in care throughout the world that we've tried to ignore for years. These visions aren't meant for us to decode when Jesus returns. They are to awaken a sense of uneasiness and to shatter the illusion that our security and hope lies in a certain political system, struggles for empire, economic well-being, or good health. The horsemen relentlessly undercut our boasting. The fifth seal is interesting because we discover where Christians who have died are, under the altar that is in the heavenly throne room. God gives them a white robe signifying purity, victory, and celebration. The martyrs are conscious that evil is still rampant and they long for justice. Yet they're told to wait because God is playing the long game to defeat evil. Now we can identify with the martyrs because we understand what it is to suffer for our faith and experience injustice. In the world's eyes, martyrs are losers, but in God's eyes, they have great value. When we read verse 11, the logical question arises, why does God need to complete the number? John leaves this question unanswered until chapter 11. The sixth seal unleashes cataclysmic world events. Creation itself seems to be ending. This same language is used in the Old Testament when the prophets warn about the day of the Lord and his wrath. These prophetic warnings remind people that creation itself responds to God's will. This causes panic because people finally realize they are at God's mercy. The rich and the famous resort to hiding in caves. They are in a panic because their money and fame won't protect them. Those Christians who thought they could escape the judgment of the culture by seeking the company of the rich and famous and assimilating into society now find they've opened themselves up to God's judgment. These visions are meant to be disturbing, not to give an explanation for evil. The question still lingers. Who is able to stand? Looks like no one. Now we'd expect to have the seventh seal open, but John will keep us in suspense as a subplot is introduced. The premise of Revelation is that creation is corrupted and needs to be purified. One way to sweep everything away is with a violent wind. But for now, 4 angels will hold the wind back so a rescue can happen. As we continue reading, we realize John writes of 2 different seals. One is the wax seal placed on a document to preserve its validity. The second seal is one that identifies belonging, like the blood of the lamb painted on the doorpost at Passover, or the seal given to the righteous ones in Ezekiel chapter 9. At baptism, Christians receive the seal of the cross of Christ, identifying them as belonging to God. The servants of God will receive a seal from the angel that offers protection from God's anger, but not necessarily protection from suffering. This seal reassures people that they will come through any suffering safely. Once again, we notice the difference between hearing and seeing. In verse 4, John hears about 144,000 from the 12 tribes of Israel who will be saved, who will be sealed. But in verse 9, John sees a great multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and language. Rather than think only 144,000 will be saved, it is better to understand this number as symbolizing completeness. The community of God encompasses people from every tribe and nation, fulfilling God's promise that he would save the world through Israel. So we finally have the answer to the question that was posed in chapter 6. The ones who can stand are the people that God seals. We are back in the heavenly throne room where the great multitude gathers, reminded that God won the final victory through Jesus. The message is that if you follow the Lamb, you will come through great suffering into the true throne room of God and celebrate triumphantly with all of creation. Now there's a great sidebar conversation beginning in verse 13. When an elder asks John, "Who are these people?" John essentially shrugs and says, "Well, I don't know." The elder answers his own question. The redeemed are those who have come through suffering, which is what the 7 churches long to hear. Yes, life is a nightmare, but you will live through it. In fact, in verse 15, God promises to shelter them, literally pitch a tent over them and live among them. This is a beautiful picture of the tabernacle from the Old Testament, where God meets his people. And the promise goes further in verse 17, where the Lamb will undergo a role reversal and become the shepherd who leads his followers, like the Good Shepherd in Psalm 23. The redeemed will be protected from the environment, hunger, and thirst, the same promises Jesus made in John chapter 6. The relationship with God will be so intimate, he will wipe all the tears from their eyes because of his deep love. Since we are offered the shelter of God, why bother hiding in caves? Finally, the 7th seal is opened, and we wait in anticipation to reveal what the scroll says. But there is utter silence. We will leave things here for the time being. Some important takeaways. After the 7 letters, the following scenes unmask the evil infecting the world. The first vision is of the heavenly throne room where all creation is oriented to God. Chapters 4 and 5 are the heart of Revelation. We learn how God's will is done through the crucified and risen Christ. The 7 seals release threats that challenge the idea we're safe from violence, economic problems, or death. But God moves to rescue his people in the midst of purifying his creation. Thanks for joining us. I'd encourage you to download the discussion guide and resources that are online. Next time, we will read of trumpets that bring terror and hope. Before we meet again, please read Revelation chapters 8 through 11 to prepare. Until then, keep the faith.